In the tree-lined streets of Laurel Heights, where success was measured in square footage and luxury cars, Camilla Ashworth seemed to have it all. At 36, she was a rising star in the cutthroat world of marketing, known for her razor-sharp instincts and relentless drive. Her husband, Dr. Maxwell Ashworth, was a respected neurosurgeon whose skill in the operating room was matched only by his dedication to his patients. From the outside, the Ashworths were the very picture of a power couple, their names often gracing the society pages of local newspapers. But behind the carefully curated image of marital bliss, a very different reality was unfolding. Camilla, once enamored with Maxwell's brilliance and ambition, now found herself increasingly frustrated by his long hours and emotional unavailability. The passion that had once drawn them together had cooled, replaced by a polite distance that felt more like a business arrangement than a marriage. It was on a crisp autumn evening in September 2022 that Camilla's life took an unexpected turn. She was attending a tech industry mixer, hoping to network and possibly land a new high-profile client for her firm. As she navigated the crowded room, her eyes locked with those of Dylan Reeves, a rising star in the world of tech startups. At 29, Dylan exuded a confidence and charisma that immediately drew Camilla in. Their conversation that night was electric, a rapid-fire exchange of ideas and shared ambitions. Dylan's innovative app, designed to revolutionize personal finance, fascinated Camilla. She saw in him not just a potential client, but a kindred spirit who understood her drive and passion in a way Maxwell never had. As the weeks passed, Camilla found herself thinking about Dylan more and more. What started as innocent text messages about work soon evolved into late-night conversations that stretched into the early hours of the morning. They began meeting for coffee, then lunch, each encounter leaving Camilla feeling more alive and desired than she had in years. The first kiss happened on a rainy afternoon in October. They had ducked into a small art gallery to escape the downpour, laughing as they shook water from their coats. As they stood before a vibrant, abstract painting, discussing its meaning, Dylan leaned in and kissed her. Camilla knew she should pull away, that she was crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. But in that moment, all she could think about was how right it felt. From that point on, Camilla's life became a careful balancing act. She threw herself into her work with renewed vigor, using it as an excuse for her late nights and distracted behavior at home. Maxwell, consumed by a particularly challenging case at the hospital, barely seemed to notice the change in his wife. Camilla told herself that what she was doing wasn't really wrong. After all, Maxwell had been emotionally absent for years, buried in his work and accolades. Didn't she deserve to feel alive, to be with someone who truly saw her? These rationalizations became her mantra as she deeper into her affair with Dylan. As autumn gave way to winter, Camilla and Dylan's relationship intensified. They stole moments together whenever they could. Clandestine meetings in out-of-the-way cafes, stolen kisses in the back of taxis, and eventually, passionate encounters in Dylan's sleek downtown loft. Camilla felt as though she was living two entirely separate lives, the polished, successful wife of Dr. Ashworth and the passionate, carefree woman who came alive in Dylan's arms. But as with all secrets, the weight of Camilla's deception began to take its toll. She found herself jumping at every unexpected sound, paranoid that her carefully constructed facade would come crashing down at any moment. The guilt she felt when looking into Maxwell's tired eyes after a long shift at the hospital was almost unbearable. As winter deepened, so did the complexities of Camilla's double life. She began to notice subtle changes in Dylan's behavior. His texts became more frequent, bordering on possessive. He would question her about her whereabouts when they weren't together, his tone laced with a hint of suspicion that made Camilla uneasy. One evening in early February, Camilla arrived at Dylan's loft to find him in a state of agitation. He paced the room, running his hands through his hair as he confronted her. "I saw you with him today," Dylan said, his voice tight with barely contained anger. You were having lunch with Maxwell, laughing like everything was perfect between you two." Camilla felt a chill run down her spine. She tried to explain that it was just a routine lunch, that she and Maxwell occasionally met to maintain appearances. But Dylan wasn't satisfied. "When are you going to leave him?" he demanded. "We should be together, Camilla, really together." This conversation marked a turning point in their affair. Camilla began to see glimpses of a side of Dylan she hadn't noticed before, a possessiveness that bordered on obsession. She tried to create some distance, to slow things down, but Dylan's intensity only seemed to grow. Meanwhile, at home, Maxwell was beginning to emerge from his work-induced fog. He noticed Camilla's distraction, the way she would startle when her phone buzzed. One night over dinner, he reached across the table and took her hand. "Is everything okay, Cam?" he asked, genuine concern in his eyes. "You seem, I don't know, distant lately." Camilla felt a surge of guilt so strong it nearly brought tears to her eyes. She managed a smile and squeezed Maxwell's hand. "Just stressed about work," she lied smoothly. "This new campaign is really demanding." Maxwell nodded, accepting her explanation without question. "I know I've been buried in my work lately," he said. "How about we take a weekend trip soon? Just the two of us, like old times." Camilla agreed, her heart heavy with the knowledge that things could never be like old times again. She excused herself shortly after, claiming a headache, and retreated to their ensuite bathroom. As she splashed cold water on her face, she stared at her reflection in the mirror, barely recognizing the woman looking back at her. The next day, Camilla met Dylan for lunch, intending to set some boundaries. But as soon as she saw him, her resolve weakened. He greeted her with a passionate kiss, pulling her close in a way that made her forget all her doubts and fears. "I've been thinking," Dylan said as they sat down. "I'm presenting my app to some major investors next month. If it goes well, and I think it will, I want us to take a trip together, somewhere far away from here, where we can just be us." Camilla felt a flutter of excitement at the idea, quickly followed by a wave of panic. A trip would mean coming clean to Maxwell, potentially ending her marriage. Was she ready for that? As she looked into Dylan's eager eyes, she realized she didn't have an answer. The weeks that followed were a blur of stolen moments and mounting tension. Camilla found herself pulled between her growing feelings for Dylan and her loyalty to the life she had built with Maxwell. She threw herself into her work, using it as a buffer against the chaos of her personal life. It was during this time that Camilla landed the biggest account of her career, a major tech conglomerate that would put her firmly on track for a partnership at her firm. The night she closed the deal, she called Dylan to celebrate. "That's amazing, babe," Dylan exclaimed. "We should go out and celebrate. I'll pick you up in an hour." Camilla hesitated. "I can't tonight," she said. "Maxwell's actually home for once, and we had plans." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Dylan spoke again, his voice was cold. "Right. Maxwell. Always Maxwell." "Dylan, don't be like that," Camilla pleaded. "You know how complicated this is." "Do I?" Dylan snapped. "Because from where I'm standing, it's pretty simple. You're either with me or you're with him. You can't have it both ways forever, Camilla." The line went dead before Camilla could respond. She stood there, phone in hand, feeling as though the ground was shifting beneath her feet. She knew Dylan was right. She couldn't keep living this double life indefinitely. Something had to give. That night, as she sat across from Maxwell at a candlelit restaurant, Camilla felt the weight of her deception more acutely than ever. Maxwell raised his glass in a toast. "To my brilliant wife," he said, his eyes warm with pride. "I know I don't say it enough, but I'm so proud of you, Cam. You're extraordinary." Camilla clinked her glass against his, forcing a smile even as guilt churned in her stomach. As the evening wore on, she found herself studying Maxwell's face, remembering all the reasons she had fallen in love with him in the first place. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she recommitted to her marriage, where she and Maxwell found their way back to each other. But even as these thoughts swirled in her mind, her phone buzzed in her purse. She knew without looking that it was Dylan, probably still angry about their earlier conversation. In that moment, Camilla realized that no matter what choice she made, someone was going to get hurt. The only question was, who? After everything we've been through, everything I've sacrificed for you. Camilla tried to calm him down, acutely aware of the scene they were causing. "Please, Dylan," she pleaded, "let's not do this here. I never meant to hurt you, but this isn't healthy for either of us." Dylan stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You'll regret this," he spat before storming out of the cafe, leaving Camilla shaken and fighting back tears. Over the next few days, Camilla's phone was inundated with messages from Dylan, alternating between desperate pleas for reconciliation and chilling threats. She blocked his number, changed her email, and warned her office not to let him in if he showed up. But even as she took these precautions, a part of her ached for the connection they had shared. At home, Camilla found herself gravitating towards Maxwell, seeking comfort in the familiar routines of their marriage. She suggested they take that weekend trip they had discussed, desperate for a chance to reconnect and perhaps salvage what was left of their relationship. Maxwell, surprised but pleased by Camilla's sudden attentiveness, eagerly agreed. They booked a quaint bed and breakfast in a nearby coastal town, planning to leave early Friday morning. As Camilla packed her bag on Thursday night, she felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps she could put this whole sordid affair behind her and rebuild her life with Maxwell. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. As Camilla zipped up her suitcase, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Her heart sank as she read the words on the screen. "If I can't have you, no one will. Say goodbye to your precious Maxwell." Panic seized Camilla as she realized the depths of Dylan's obsession. She had to warn Maxwell, to protect him from the monster she had unwittingly unleashed. But as she turned to rush downstairs, she heard the sound of breaking glass, followed by a heavy thud. Her blood ran cold as she crept towards the top of the stairs, peering down into the darkened foyer. There, illuminated by the pale moonlight streaming through the window, she saw two figures locked in a violent struggle. The glint of metal caught her eye, and with horror, she realized that Dylan was wielding a knife. Camilla's mind raced as she watched the struggle unfold below. She knew she had to act quickly to save Maxwell, but fear paralyzed her for a crucial moment. The sound of Maxwell's pained grunt snapped her back to reality. Without thinking, she grabbed a heavy crystal vase from the hallway table and descended the stairs as quietly as she could. Dylan's back was to her, his attention focused entirely on overpowering Maxwell. Camilla could see blood staining Maxwell's shirt, and her husband's face was contorted in pain and shock. As she approached, she heard Dylan's voice, low and menacing. "She was supposed to be mine," Dylan hissed. "We were going to have a life together, but you ruined everything." Maxwell's eyes widened as he spotted Camilla behind Dylan. In that split second of distraction, Dylan raised the knife, ready to deliver a fatal blow. Camilla didn't hesitate. With all her strength, she brought the vase down on Dylan's head. The impact was sickening. Dylan crumpled to the floor, the knife clattering beside him. For a moment, the only sound in the room was heavy breathing and the distant wail of approaching sirens. A neighbor must have heard the commotion and called the police. Camilla rushed to Maxwell, helping him sit up against the wall. "Oh God, Max, I'm so sorry," she sobbed, pressing her hands against the wound on his side. "This is all my fault." Maxwell winced in pain, but managed to place his hand over hers. "Cam," he said weakly, "what's going on? Who is that man?" Before Camilla could respond, police officers burst through the front door, weapons drawn. The next few hours passed in a blur of paramedics, police questions, and crime scene investigators. Maxwell was rushed to the hospital, while Dylan, still unconscious, was taken into custody. Camilla found herself sitting in a stark interrogation room at the police station, facing Detective Laura Simmons. The detective's piercing gaze seemed to see right through Camilla's carefully constructed facade. "Mrs. Ashworth," Detective Simmons began, I need you to tell me everything about your relationship with Dylan Reeves." And so, with a heavy heart, Camilla confessed. She told the detective about the affair, about Dylan's growing obsession, and about her failed attempt to end things. As she spoke, the full weight of her actions crashed down upon her. She had not only betrayed her husband, but had put his life in danger. "I never meant for any of this to happen," Camilla said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was selfish and reckless, and now Maxwell is paying the price." Detective Simmons nodded, her expression softening slightly. "Mr. Reeves will be charged with attempted murder," she said. "As for you, Mrs. Ashworth, while adultery isn't a crime, there may be legal consequences if it's found that you knowingly put your husband in danger." Camilla nodded, numb with shock and guilt. She was released from the police station in the early hours of the morning and went straight to the hospital. Maxwell had just come out of surgery, and the doctors reported that, while his injuries were serious, he was expected to make a full recovery. As Camilla sat by Maxwell's bedside, watching his chest rise and fall with each breath, she was overcome with a mix of relief and remorse. When Maxwell's eyes finally fluttered open, Camilla braced herself for the anger and disgust she was sure would follow. But Maxwell's first words took her by surprise. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Tears spilled down Camilla's cheeks as she shook her head. "How can you ask me that?" she said. "After everything I've done?" Maxwell was silent for a long moment, his eyes never leaving Camilla's face. "I'm not going to pretend I'm not hurt and angry," he finally said. "But I also know that our marriage hasn't been what it should be for a long time. We both share blame in that." Camilla took Maxwell's hand, squeezing it gently. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," she said, "but I want you to know how sorry I am and how much I regret everything that's happened." In the days and weeks that followed, Camilla and Maxwell had many long, painful conversations. They talked about the breakdown of their marriage, about the affair, and about whether they had a future together. It was decided that Camilla would move out temporarily, giving them both space to process and heal. Dylan Reeves was charged with attempted murder and stalking. His trial became a media sensation, with Camilla's affair thrust into the public spotlight. She faced harsh judgment from many quarters, but she accepted it as part of the consequences of her actions. As the dust settled, Camilla found herself at a crossroads. Her career, once her primary focus, now seemed hollow in the face of the damage her ambition had caused. She made the difficult decision to step down from her position, choosing instead to focus on rebuilding her life and, if possible, her relationship with Maxwell. The road ahead was uncertain, but Camilla was committed to facing it with honesty and humility. She knew that trust, once broken, was not easily repaired. But as she looked at Maxwell across the table of their favorite cafe, 6 months after that fateful night, she saw a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "I can't promise you it will be easy," Maxwell said, reaching out to take her hand. "But I think we owe it to ourselves and to what we once had to try." Camilla nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "That's all I can ask for," she said softly. As they left the cafe, walking side by side but not quite touching, Camilla realized that true love wasn't about grand gestures or passionate affairs. It was about choice, choosing to work through the hard times, to forgive, and to grow together. And for the first time in a long while, she felt she was finally making the right choice.